But today's session, this afternoon session, and I said we are going to now get practical. The first session was devoted to defining the terms. What is open education really all about? What are the issues? And so I think we now have kind of a common terminology and a common framework for discussing things. And now we're going to talk about how to actually make some of this happen. So we've already discussed the idea of how do you find OERs? That's about searching, conducting searches that actually lead to the discovery of what you're searching for. And then we're also going to have a panel discussion of people teaching with OER, so the practicalities of OER. So here's our agenda today, and our presentation, Finding Open Educational Resources, is by Rachael Gilg. Rachael is project manager at COERLL. She has a background in information and web design, and she is an expert at finding great stuff on the internet. So Rachael, take it away.
Thank you. Okay, I think we have about 30 minutes for me to present sort of what I've learned since joining COERLL about what's out there and how to find open educational resources. But this is by no means comprehensive, so I'd love it if people who are online could post in the stream their favorite places to find OER and their search strategies. And I'm hoping that I can compile this all into, we do have a wiki, and we started to put up some information about sources, and I want to really expand that. So I'm going to be showing you a lot of websites today, and just know they're all going to be available in a collection for you to access later. So if it kind of goes by and it's a blur, then you can go back and study it later. Okay, so what are we doing today? We're going to, we probably won't need a piece of equipment like this, but we're going to first define what it is we're looking for, what we expect is out there in the world of OER, specifically for language learning. Then we're going to discover some ways of finding these OERs for searching and finding. And then finally, we're going to narrow the focus a little bit and explore some specific, more specific repositories and collections and communities that are really geared towards language learning OER. So what, just narrow things down a little bit. Okay, so we've kind of mentioned all these things before in the previous talk and in your discussions, that these are things we think about when we think about OER. Not just textbooks, not just courseware, but you know, syllabi, anything related to teaching and learning in the classroom or out of the classroom. And also in the field of foreign language teaching, it's been brought up that there's all this authentic content in the L2 that we're looking for too. So that's what makes language learning materials a little bit different, is that we have kind of a broader need to find this open content that we can use to turn it into pedagogical content. So I'm going to talk about both of these, both the traditional instructional materials and how to find just authentic content in the L2. I'm going to focus on material that's openly licensed. Again, you know, that's not, there are plenty of open access resources out there as well, but the strategies I'm going to be focusing on today really are more focused on finding the material that is openly licensed. And you know, we went over this all in the morning, so you all understand that an open license means, you know, the 4 R's are enabled. And really what the open license is it's an explicit document that tells you what exactly you can do with it. So Creative Commons just makes that easy. You can also have an OER that, you know, you might have a page on your website where you just tell educators, okay, these are the ways you can use it, these are the ways you can't use it. But if you just put a Creative Commons license on it, that's a lot easier. But either way, that's what we need to know. We need that information on how exactly can I use this. And again, this is kind of review. We know that with an open license, you don't have to ask permission to use it. It can be better than just simply linking to the material. I know there's a lot of teachers who like to use content on YouTube, but there's always that fear, oh, the link's going to go away and then I won't have it, and is there any way I can just download it? Well, not legally, but if you're looking at Creative Commons licensed material, yes, you can legally. I mean, there's the technical capability as well as the legal ability to download that content and host it in a place where it will be stable and it will stick around. And then, of course, there's, in some cases, you are able to adapt and customize material that is open licensed. So how do you tell if a website you're visiting has a Creative Commons license? You'll see it in different ways. You'll see the button with the icon, and it tells you exactly what the restrictions are. As you click on it, it's a link that goes to the Creative Commons site and tells you exactly what you can do with it. Sometimes people will just put a text link in the footer and you won't see the button. Sometimes it's in the sidebar. You'll get good at recognizing it. But one really cool thing about the fact that that license is embedded on the website is that makes it searchable by search engines. So a search engine can identify all of the websites that have that license on them. So Google knows which sites are Creative Commons licensed. So this is a really great search interface. It's actually not a search engine, but it's a link to many different places you can search for openly licensed content. You enter your search there, and then you say, I want something I can, and there's selections for if you want something you can use commercially. Obviously, that doesn't really apply here, but modify, adapt, or build on. If you want that remix capability, then you would check that. And then you can choose where you want to search. So Google, that's an obvious one to start with. And that way everything you pull up in your Google search will be openly licensed. So you have no fear of using it, reusing it, copying it, etc. So if there's one URL that you remember from today, I would go for this one, because it's your gateway into all of these archives. Well, the entire web. I mean, it turns the entire web into an open learning repository, basically. YouTube. So YouTube, about a year ago, started offering the Creative Commons license. So when you upload a video to YouTube, you can now choose if you want to put that license on your video. They just passed the 4 million mark. So that's a lot of content that's there, and you are free to do anything you like with it. Some other sources, Wikimedia Commons. This is the sister site to Wikipedia. So all of the images that are on Wikipedia come from Wikimedia Commons. There's also videos and sounds on that site. Flickr, I'm sure you're all familiar with Flickr. 67 million photos on that site are shareable. So it's actually the Creative Commons share alike, so you can remix them, you can republish them. Project Gutenberg, these are electronic books, and these are in the public domain actually. There's electronic versions and audio versions, and there are over 65 languages. Some of the language collections are fairly large. Okay, so what do we need to do once we find this Creative Commons license work? Again, these are just some details of what exactly does it mean to provide attribution. You have to credit the creator, provide the title and the URL, so the person who's using your work knows that, okay, they know exactly where to go for the original. So you can think of it as a way of also promoting your work by allowing it to be shared this way. You're going to have all those links back to your original. This is an interesting tool. It's actually a browser plugin that makes the whole attribution process simpler. You plug it in, and then when you're browsing, you'll see in your navigation bar there a little CC pops up. So whenever you're on a website that has the Creative Commons license on it, that will appear. And then if you click on it, it will automatically pull. You can choose to select the attribution and copy it. and then you have a copy and you just paste it into whatever it is you're creating. So that makes it a lot easier than trying to find out, okay, who's the creator and what URL do I use and everything like that. So I would check that out. I know it's for Firefox and I'm sure Chrome. I don't know what all browsers have it, but that's a good tool. Okay, so we've sort of talked in general about these kind of open content repositories, how the Creative Commons license works, and now I want to go in a little narrower and talk about some specific repositories and how good or bad they are for language learning OER. And before I do that, just quickly, these are all things that you brought up when you're talking about your ideal OER, that it's going to meet with all these criteria, right? You're going to be able to match it easily with your learners, with the level, etc. You're going to, it's going to be easy to plug in to your curriculum. The ease of use, obviously looking for formats that are flexible or content that's in multiple formats can be a real advantage when you're evaluating OER. Obviously the license is an important thing to look at. Reputation of the author and peer review, and a lot of the repositories are really trying to build in that community review of resources. And then just in general community support, who's using it, and how big of a group of people are using it, because the more community support it has, it's going to be a stronger resource. Okay, so here's some examples that you might be familiar with. Merlot, most of you have probably heard of Merlot. Has checked it out? Okay. Some of you, okay. Merlot has a really large collection of language materials. You can actually browse by languages. It's very well curated. They have editors working to collect materials. They have user-submitted materials, but also editors that go out and find materials for language learning. So it really is a good resource. The materials are not all OER. They're all online learning materials. The license can vary. And here's just, there's actually a World Languages portal on Merlot, and we actually have, if you're interested, Laura Franklin, who is the editor of the languages section, gave a talk that we have online on our YouTube site, if you're interested in learning kind of more about what Merlot offers. And then you can see here, just on the side, there's a list of all the languages, so you can narrow by language and narrow by material type if you're looking for textbooks, if you're looking for a quiz or a test or a tutorial, or it's really broken down, and there's a lot of good metadata there for finding what you're looking for. Also, you can see on the side, there's ones that have floated up to the top. They're editor's choice. So they definitely have a system there for peer review and floating the best content up to the top. Okay, OER Commons. This is a newer site. It really is focused around OER. It includes both big OER. You're going to find MIT courses in here, as well as little OER, just a lesson plan that an educator submitted. It's a little, I agree that it's difficult to find things sometimes. They still have some work to do, I think, in their organization. The language collection is very small. You can't actually just go directly to a language collection. You have to go through just general humanities. So we've set up all of our materials in here. There is a little bit of a hurdle too, because they require that you have an explicit license, either Creative Commons or some terms of use. So in order to get your material in there, you really have to have thought that through. So it's not just any online open access material. It really is focused on OER. They've also launched some new authoring features that they hope will make it easy for individual educators to create the materials directly in the site and then share them. So this is how one of our sites looks. with the description and the metadata. They are doing some things with trying to align it to standards, but again, this is mostly non-language materials at this point. And you see, you can have an account here and save your favorite resources, and so both Merlot and OER Commons are doing similar things in terms of really trying to provide community features, both in managing your own private collections of materials and also authoring materials directly in the repository. Both Merlot and OER Commons now have authoring tools, so you can. It's just like a basic word processor. Maybe you can link a video in there and you can create materials directly to be shared. Connections is another one, and this really is a repository as opposed to just a referatory that collects metadata. The Connections repository was developed in order to create and share small knowledge chunks that they call modules, and then people can put modules together into courses. We haven't been using this. This hasn't been used a lot for language learning yet, but it is a very powerful tool. Okay, we also have, there's also language centers such as COERLL and other various institutional archives. I just want to highlight a few that I think are some interesting examples of using the idea of open educational resources and for language learning. Of course, COERLL, we have our materials page currently just broken down by language. When you click in, you get a bit of description. And one new thing that we've been doing is adding user-created materials that relate to that original resource. So, in this case, this was an instructor who was using these Portuguese videos that we had online, and she had actually created lesson plans that went with each of the worksheets, or with each of the videos. And she said, "Hey, I have got these. Would you be interested in sharing them back with your users?" And of course, we said, "Yes, that would be great." And so we have them here in our, we have the metadata here, and then also linked from the site with the actual videos. It'll be also linked there. So we're really trying to build. We know we have these communities around our resources, and we're trying to enable more sharing of those related materials. Of course, we're part of a network also of language resource centers that have all kinds of resources. Again, not all of them are open. Some of them you even have to pay for, but if you go to the website, you can search across all the language resource center materials. There is a checkbox. If you're just looking for free resources, you can check that and get a lot of different materials. This is a really interesting example. Loro is by the Open University in the UK, and this really is intended to be an OER repository specifically for language learning materials. So they're using this. They do distance education, and all of their foreign language educators use this repository, but they've also opened it up so that any educator can get an account here and start creating and sharing and remixing materials. And it is mostly, lesson plans and classroom activities. They don't have, they don't have a lot of, the videos and things like that. You can add videos, but it really is mostly things like lesson plans. But it's really interesting because you can see it is a community, so you've got the details of the person who added it. And this was actually a resource, and so it's about famous buildings, and it was something that was they have some resources in here that the university created and put them in here. So this teacher took one that had been created by the university and she adapted it. She says in the comments here that she went through and she added some famous buildings from Ireland because those were the students she was teaching. So that's just a great example of how opening things up and making them editable, you can really localize. You don't have to start from scratch. You can take something that's existing and just modify, customize it a little bit, and then share it back. So I would encourage you to sign up for this and see what's there and see if you want to become part of that community, because it really is unique. I haven't seen much like it. Okay, this is just another example that I think is interesting, because so they've got authentic materials for less commonly taught languages. But they not only provide the materials, they also provide these lesson plans or sort of templates. So how can you use this authentic material? All of these lesson plans are Creative Commons licensed. So I think that's a good, if we have a set of authentic resources, it's really good to have the accompanying instructional material and have that be shareable. I think that's a good model. And then here's another thing. I just came across this recently. I hadn't seen this before. Yeah, but so these are all Creative Commons licensed images, and they're organized by region, by language, and then within, if you click down a level, it'll be organized by themes. And it's really is it for teaching vocabulary mostly, or culture? But it's culturally appropriate for the language. And those are all Creative Commons licensed, and they've actually put together this quite sizable collection. I think another important and growing source are just the individuals that are out there curating materials for us and sharing those through social media. Twitter, there's a lot happening on Twitter. I know that there's this LangChat hashtag group that gets together on a regular basis. They actually all log in once a week, I think, and share ideas. They have a theme and they share ideas for materials or actual materials. So that's one community. For our materials, we started to use Facebook as a place for teachers to share about relevant things related to our materials, so that our Facebook community for this resource now I think has like 7,000 likes, and it's really a pretty active place. So that's another way if you get sort of plugged into those communities of finding out about OERs. And this is, there's social bookmarking sites. Delicious is sort of old news, I know. Not used very much, but this is a collection of OER for language learning that I stumbled across, and it's all tagged with different levels, and it's a lot of work. I think actually this might have been a grant-funded project, but there's lots of little. I'm sure all of you know people who do this kind of thing and put together these great collections, and I think now probably it's not on Delicious, probably it's Pinterest or something like that, but I think social media is a great way to find out about OER. So, and what I think is really the future are these repositories that are really these remixing platforms. So you can find content, and directly in the site you can take it and modify it and publish it and share it. So a few of those, I don't know if many of you are familiar, but YouTube has a video editor in it. And you can actually, if you're in the video editor, so I've just searched on, I'm looking maybe for something about a French bakery. So I can search, and I have all these videos that are Creative Commons licensed here. I can pull them down and make my own video right there. You can add, also in YouTube, you could add annotations if you wanted to have subtitles on part of it, or, whatever you wanted to do with it. You can do whatever, just make it your own, and then republish it to your own YouTube account. So that's really it makes it very simple to remix. This is another example. TED Ed has released this. They have this concept of flipping a video. It really is, they're trying to promote the use of video to create educational content that's wrapped around a video. We had a workshop earlier this summer where we played around with this a little bit. You can actually embed any, this is just a YouTube video from our Spanish in Texas site. You can embed any video from YouTube in this player. And then on the side, it's kind of hard to see here, but you can add information. So you can add questions for the learner to think about before they watch the video, some follow-up questions. I think eventually they're going to have the ability to add multiple choice questions and these kinds of things. And then you can share those with your students, and then your students can log in and actually respond, and then you can see their responses. So this is something new and kind of exciting in terms of being able to work with these multimedia materials. This is another example I just found out about recently. It's very similar to TED Ed, but it is really focused around language learning. This is a site, Videotech by Carleton University in Canada, and again, you can embed any video from YouTube in this interface, and then they've got a whole set of different exercises you can add, multiple choice, various types of exercises that you can put with this video. It's only in French right now, but they are working on other languages, and it's all Creative Commons licensed. This is an interesting tool. So the idea behind OER Glue is that you should be able to easily gather resources and build a course out of them. And I actually honestly haven't used this very much. I think it's been in development for a while, and I looked at it early on, and it didn't seem that much, but I just recently went back, and it seemed like it's coming along, so it'd be something worth checking out. And I just want to, follow that with this quote. This is the CEO of Creative Commons, and she really emphasizes that the real magic is in the reuse and remix, and that's really what we're striving for with OER. And eventually, I think it's going to become easier and easier. It seems like there really is this, there's a lot of stuff happening with authoring tools and making it just seamless to author something and share it. So I'm excited to see what happens. So. Okay, I guess we have about 10 minutes for questions.
I know this is way below your level, Rachel, but go back to Google and tell me again how to do a search to find open.
Yeah.
That's CC search. That's what she was saying, the killer app. That's what you need to know. That's the one takeaway from this, is this one, so that's CC Creative Commons search. Search everything that's open on the web.
We can get a connection.
And CC search is the website that you go on.
Yeah, it's the search interface of Creative Commons, and they make it very easy for you to find everything that's open. Because the Creative Commons licenses are machine readable, so once somebody puts that license on, it makes that object readable for search engines. So that's what they do. And you can sort it by level of openness, just as we were saying earlier today. Is it opening?
Yeah,
Because sometimes you'll find really good things, but
There you go.
and then discover it's completely protected. You can read it, but
Right,
you can't.
that's the whole point.
You can't do anything with it.
So if you go to this site, so this is like it's not directly searching Google, but it's a link to the Creative Commons search in Google. It's kind of hard to find in Google. You have to go to like advanced search and then like select. I can never find the advanced search in Google, so I just come here and I select this Google site, and then what do you want to search for? Do you have?
Portuguese 101, beginning Portuguese or something.
Portuguese grammar.
Wikipedia.
Wiki.
Okay, it looks like there's a Wikibooks. Yep. So that's some open Portuguese grammar.
Or Portuguese text. Look for a Portuguese textbook.
This Wikibooks might actually be a textbook. Yeah. So that's a textbook. This is a pretty popular platform that I didn't talk about, but the Wikibooks and all that material. You could take it and you could print it all out and compile it into a textbook and
Show them about images too, because you can search for images. It's not just text.
Mm-hmm. So for an image, I probably want to search. Well, Google Images actually is pretty good because I think it. Whoops! Oh, no images for Portuguese grammar.
So go for Lisboa, Lisboa.
LIS.
Don't you have to go back though?
This is labeled for commercial reuse with modification. So that's the most open license. You can take them and remix them.
You can also type in public domain. If they're public domain, then they're completely free to use.
Yeah. These photos, if you use them, you still have to attribute the original creator.
Which is not a big deal, but yeah.
You mentioned that on YouTube you can see if the videos pertain to the commons created.
Uh-huh.
I don't know where to find that.
You can do that through actually the same CC search. Also has YouTube. So here we go. Here's some videos that all have the Creative Commons license.
But what if I know of a video and I want to check?
Oh, okay. Yeah, there's let's see. If you look. Let's see. Here's the license. So here it says reuse allowed.
Could you click on that license to show? Then it'll take. Yeah.
That's how if you're uploading a video, you can mark it as Creative Commons. And then this talks about how you can edit a video. Anything else? Anybody have any sources that I've missed or?
What kind of permissions do you need? So if say you're videotaping a class session and you want to upload it to YouTube and YouTube.
Well, that's like.
That's an IRB question.
Yeah, I mean with the.
Tell the group.
Yeah, so the question was, what if you want to videotape a class and put it up on YouTube? Yeah, I mean, then you run into FERPA and the sort of student privacy legal issues. So it's kind of aside from copyright. If it wasn't a class of your students, if it wasn't a class of your students, you could just have them sign a release form saying that I allow COERLL to use allow you to use my image and just kind of a standard release form. And then you would own the copyright. I mean, if you're making the video and these people have signed off, then you're the copyright holder. And so then you can choose the license you want to put on it.
Any questions?
I'll be very interested to see when you have this all compiled, because this is something that we could also give to our students when they're doing projects and trying to find different ways of finding materials. And is this something that, for example, the University of Texas has implemented in classes?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so the question was that this information about how to find these resources would also be very useful for students, and it could be part of the classroom activities. And has anybody tried that in classrooms here at UT? And I would say the answer is yes. I'm sure Orlando Kelm, his students are always creating videos. Yeah, I mean, I think that's one of the huge, when this production becomes a collaborative effort, students are very much a part of that. When we were putting together the Yoruba Yemi textbook, that happened last year, and there was a Yoruba class that was, they were sort of the pilot of that textbook, and it was really amazing to see how much more they got out of that class. They were really engaged. I mean, they knew that this was material that their teacher had created and put together, and they really became involved. We actually had students help with the copy editing. They were told they were helping to find errors and make the textbook better. They ended up at the end producing some supplemental materials. They produced some videos and posted them online. I mean, if a student posts something online themselves, there's no problem with that. I mean, that's, the copyright issues are, they own that and they can publish it. So that can definitely be part of a class, and I think it's it's definitely a part of OER.
I wanted to say, though, remember what I said at the beginning, that all the PowerPoint slides and everything is available, so you can take that and then just upload it to Blackboard or whatever you use.
Yeah.
Give it away to your students, because while we are doing this, a lot of students do not know about copyright issues. So this is just a little primer that we've made for copyright issues and openness for foreign languages. So yeah, give it away to your students.
Well, and also the use of OER by lifelong learners.
Yeah.
I mean, I think most of the users of the independent users of FI aren't enrolled in a class. They're just using it to learn French. So there's a huge audience of people who want to know how to find these materials.
Okay, thank you. So yes, our agenda tells us that we're going to now have a panel discussion. So now that you've found what you were looking for, your OER, what do you do with it? How do you teach with it? So let me invite our panelists up to the front here. George, Christopher, Amy, Fernando. And again, this session is going to be fairly loosely structured. I'm going to be asking questions, but we can take questions from from Adobe Connect, so people joining us virtually, as well as anybody from the audience can ask a question to the panelists. So we're not going to do the Bravo television show, the kind of Housewives of Atlanta. I'll just see if I can get you guys into a fight. We're going to put you in a more traditional setting. There we go. Chris told me that he has everything on his laptop, so he can't think without it, so he can't sit on a little stool and balance his laptop with his hand. So, okay. Right. right, so the ground rules for this, of course, we need a mic so that people can hear us online. So I prepared a couple of questions to get things going, and I asked the panelists to kind of think about their own experiences of teaching with OERs. Now, they're a little bit different in that they've really all spent a lot of time developing OERs, right? But I want this to be the focus. We'll talk more about developing tomorrow, but right now the focus should be on teaching. So to get things going, the big question is, what are the effects of OER on your teaching, and how has it affected your classroom? Who wants to start?
Well, a few years back, I started using OERs as the actual textbook for my class. Before that, I was using some publisher-sponsored materials, and I have to admit that there were a couple of years before that I had started kind of dipping my foot in the bathtub of using OERs, just kind of using them as supplemental materials with my publisher-sponsored things. So I had a little bit of a training time to get myself used to how they work and what one should do with them. And I think now that I use them exclusively, on myself, the effect on myself has been that it's been a great source of professional development for me. It's opened me up into doing research online to find things that I never thought were there. So, and I think the effect on my students has been that I find that it produces better speakers. Well, French in my case. The publisher-sponsored materials that I was using were very traditional, kind of grammar, drill, kill, not a lot of conversation going on, and now that I'm using these OERs, I think my face-to-face time with them is more precious, and so we spend more time using a language than talking about it.
So you've adopted kind of a flipped classroom model. You use more your OERs for them. How exactly are you using it?
Our class is supposed to be, normally if it were a completely face-to-face class, it would be 5 contact hours a week. And in my case, we have 3 face-to-face hours a week, and we do the other 2 online, carrying out various technology tasks. And that can be doing grammar exercises, making recordings, doing exercises in other third-party software programs. But in class, we're working our way through the activities and speaking French.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Pass it on. Amy.
OER have allowed me to integrate content and language learning in a way that using commercial materials is just not available to do. So you're able to use authentic materials and then structure them in a way that they're accessible to language learners and promote language learning. And I think this is beneficial for my teaching and certainly for the students who are now able to connect the language use with the real world and current events, things that are happening, so that it becomes more relevant and it's much more transparent why they're in the classroom, not just because the college said they needed to be in there.
Yeah, I guess I have to give you guys a shout out, because I think that's one of the things that makes Access so terrific, is that you're using absolutely current, up-to-date materials, and you're drawing from all kinds of media sites. So that's a great example of up-to-the-minute, authentic materials embedded in pedagogical materials. Okay.
My experience is more with the little OER side of things. We in the course that COERLL mentioned at the beginning of the session, it's an introduction to Spanish. It's a beginning Spanish course. We use about half publisher-created materials and half our own materials that we developed. And we develop materials both from a community of designers, of teachers who teach that class, that have developed materials that we use for the class, and also developed by the students themselves. who are the users and the producers at the same time. And that has changed completely how both teachers and students look at their role in the course. Students are not simply passive consumers now. That changes their whole attitude towards the course. So in the past, when they were doing something for you, the teacher, because you're going to see it and evaluate it and give it a grade, now it's completely different. They know that they're doing something that other students are going to be looking at and commenting on and modifying and learning from. So the audience changes completely, and the way they look at their language learning process is completely different.
And that makes me think of what I was talking about. We mentioned Orlando Kelm and his use of different sites in the idea of openness, that continuum, open classrooms. So you've opened it up. You have students who are looking at other people's productions. There are other students' productions. But you can open it up further and then have public viewing areas. You can invite native speakers in your case in teaching Spanish, to actually comment on the materials. If you're comfortable with that, if your students want to do that. And he's done that quite successfully in Portuguese. So they will find a video clip, comment, or write an essay about it, and then actual people from Brazil end up in conversation. So, well, that's true, but not exactly. So he's opened up the classroom even more, I would say.
I have a question about how he's able to do that with FERPA, because we have these ideas. I mean, we would love to do that, but we're really not permitted to, because it is student work once they're producing. And then
The question is about FERPA, so doesn't that raise issues? Amy says that at Kansas that they're not permitted to do that. Orlando, where are you? He's not here today. Yeah, maybe. But you're right, that's a gray area. And I was just attending yesterday afternoon. UT is looking at, we have Blackboard, and they're looking at other LMSs, and one of them is Canvas. And it's very easy for you to kind of have parts of your course that are public. So it may be that student production doesn't have to be for a grade, it just might be for a blog, and the blog is really to get interaction with native speakers. So I'm not quite sure how Orlando was finessing that, but yeah. Chris.
Okay, I should clarify, I'm here under OER auspices, but the course material that I am primarily responsible for was, the creation began in the late 90s. So it's a little bit of kind of retrofitting OER on top of a process of work that's been going on for almost 15 years. And in terms of the way the design, in other words, ours is now an open textbook. It is a complete course. It is self-contained, including testing and all of those sorts of things. And it was designed that way, and it was a radical redesign of its delivery at the same time. So we now have a single 80-minute meeting weekly, plus an individual face-to-face meeting, and that can be via Skype, alternating with a student assistant and with the instructor, and then lots of online activities, chats and B-board postings and so forth. So it really totally changed the way that I was teaching French, and we still maintain a conventional classroom track, but there are classes like this in Chinese, French, and Spanish, and we're doing some work in Arabic at the moment. Anyway, so what did it allow this sort of design, the interactive materials, and as I was saying at lunch, say a semester of French Online, which is the course that I co-authored, has 1,000 pages of content, 10,000 media files. It's a massive exposure to interaction, to native speakers, in other words, myriad voices, various ethnic origins within the French diaspora and so forth, which is completely impossible in a conventional textbook environment. And there is a weekly test prior to the class, which we can access and look at profiles across skills and so forth. So to prepare the instructor to give a very focused 80-minute class oriented almost entirely toward communication, which is sort of a common theme here when there's a heavy use of OER materials outside, of course, of the class. I'll talk at another time about what the development process and so forth is about.
I have a comment from the virtual community or virtual audience, and they say, please be specific when you're talking about your methodologies, to be as specific as possible. Okay, so I want to ask then, and I want to say, Chris mentioned the idea of retrofitting older materials. That's where we are in foreign languages. A lot of the OERs, there's a question of whether we should even try to retrofit. Retrofit's a lot of work, or should we just try to create materials that are now kind of native using these new authoring tools? That's kind of a discussion maybe for tomorrow when we talk about designing and collaborating, where we should be going. But that's actually one of the reasons why I wanted you here, Chris, is to talk about that. So he's been at it for a long, long time, a lot longer than most people, and you can see where things have changed. Okay, so the question now is, can you tell me succinctly, what do you think the pros and the cons have been for you? You kind of did that already to a certain extent, but for you, and I'm also not asking people to summarize the entire field of OERs, but in your classroom for you, what has been the good and what has been the bad?
Well, the good is that I get to make connections with other French teachers who are as excited about using these materials and teaching French in a new way as I am. I mentioned earlier when we were in groups and I was moderating, reporting back that it can be frustrating sometimes to sell this whole idea to colleagues who don't know what OERs are and have been doing things in a certain way for a certain number of years. So that's kind of a frustration, but I'm happy to report now that my home institution has fully adopted Français Interactif. So now we're all going to be teaching programs.
Good. Yeah, that's a good example of you're creating your own little community of practice right in. I mean, we think of big communities of practice, but our colleagues are a little core. Yeah. Amy.
I think the major pro for our program has been having the instructors themselves have buy-in, because the graduate students are creating a lot of these materials. So we have 40 graduate student instructors at a time working with these materials, and these now, it feels like theirs. And while we're using them as pedagogical development for them, the future professoriate, it's also helping them feel more connected to the teaching part of their job and trying to connect that to their research part of their studies.
That sounds like a double-edged sword, though. I feel like that could be a pro and a con, right? You have 40 people, graduate students, creating materials? Question mark.
Yeah, maybe we can talk about that in the development part tomorrow, but a con has definitely been foisting the technology on everyone, because it is all digital. Basically, I asked these people to just jump off a cliff with me. Like, we're not gonna have a textbook. We're gonna do this. And I mean, any kind of radical change, results in radical pushback. So it's been challenging. I think that we're primarily believers, at least on the instructor level, and then that trickles down to the students. When the instructors are reticent, that comes through very clearly, and you can see that in the student evaluations. The instructor's not on board, then the students certainly will wonder what we're doing. The technology itself has been part of the con. Everyone, a lot of people have been requesting print materials, and I think that's possible with some of the materials that are being produced, because there can be a PDF version. What we're doing, trying to be more specific for the web people, is actually sort of creating a hub or a portal to accessing authentic materials. And so when we use Or, then we get the student evaluations, they're like, why won't you just let us print this? And I was like, we really have a communication problem here because I cannot print the internet for you. Or the video, or, it just let us know that we were not communicating clearly enough to our students what this was, that there was no secret print version that we were withholding, that was not what we were doing. And so that's been challenging in the classroom, looking across the screen. We don't have a mobile version of it yet. We use a lot of Flash, so we are not yet iPad compatible or iPhone compatible, which is a problem. So it presents, the technology has been a challenge for our specific context.
And I will probably repeat a lot of what you guys just said. The big pro is, for us, has been creating community of users and a community of designers, and that has resulted in a lot more buy-in. And it has changed the way both instructors and students look at the course. It has given us the ability to do what really makes sense in our context, which is a lot more complicated when you're using materials that are commercially developed and that are, as Carl said this morning, generic by definition. They have to be generic. This gives you the ability to create the materials that make sense in your particular context.
Just let me interrupt you for a second and ask again, since they're asking for specifics. What got you to do this? All right, you had a textbook. Why didn't you just use the textbook for everything? Why did you say, I'm going to use it half and half? And you have a very specific set of goals that you were trying to accomplish. What were they?
Well, the truth is that everyone who uses the textbook spends a very significant amount of time trying to modify the textbook so that it works for your particular needs, right? We, 6 years ago, we decided to go hybrid with our first-year Spanish course. And the commercially available materials were not designed for a hybrid course that only meets face-to-face half the time. So we had to do something to adapt to a new context, a new situation. We needed materials that reflected what we were doing in our own situation, where we were only meeting twice a week, as opposed to 4 days a week in a traditional program. So we had to create a lot of materials that were not available, and we had to modify a lot of what we had in the commercially available textbook that we were using, and in addition to that, create a lot of materials. So rather than going and trying to retrofit the textbook that was available, we decided to spend the same amount of time developing different activities and assessment instruments and so on and so forth.
And so you've done 50%, right? You have 50% textbook, 50% all your materials. Have you thought about 100% like Amy?
I have.
Yes. So what's keeping you from doing this?
I'm working on it.
Oh, okay.
It's time consuming. I don't know if we're talking about the Commons as well, but that's one of the big challenges, that it is time consuming.
Right.
That if you want to do it right, you have to have a team that really believes in what you're doing. If you're working with graduate students, like some of us are, they come and go every 2 or 3 years. So you're training new people, and you're trying to make them buy into your idea every 2 or 3 years. That's challenging, and that's time consuming. And if you're working primarily with that type of population, then most of the responsibility falls on one person. And that one person is you. And we mentioned briefly this morning the challenge that people face when you're in a research institution where this type of work may not receive the recognition that it should.
Okay. So Chris, same question for you, pros and cons.
Okay, I guess pros, and this is really from my experience, in other words, this potential for diversification of the materials we use, and Amy is probably the poster child for this one, but she's working on an intermediate course as well. The French course is pretty rigorously designed, but we still, we were able to go shoot video in France, and then we went and shot in Montreal too, and as anybody who teaches French if your students who are, weaned on Parisian French, they hear somebody from Montreal speak, they kind of go, oh my God, what is it, So I actually convinced the Quebec government that I needed to do this, and they needed to give me a little bit of money to do it, and they did. Whether it actually helps is another question. But anyway, but that's something that, and I'd love to go to Senegal or something next, but we'll see. And the other thing, of course, is that our courseware and our particular platform allows us to track students in ways that it's impossible to do with the textbook. So really get a sense of where they are individually.
What exactly does, that's one of OLI's strongest suits.
It's one of their strongest suits, but it's still evolving, frankly.
Right.
We technically collect data on what every student does at every moment, including how many times they click the play bar and so forth. In terms of actually exploiting that data, that's another story. It's kind of coming. But even being able to know what pages they visited, and then of course we have those weekly quizzes, which give us a snapshot of what they've done in the course. That's extremely useful to an instructor. So other positives kind of locally for us is links across the university. We're in a technical university, which gives me links to computer science and the Language Technologies Institute and human-computer interaction, and then of course other colleagues, people in this room, and other people across the country. Now, cons for me about OER generally is that the majority are not sustainable. My bugaboo is sustainability, and that's for both content and technical reasons. And Flash is an obvious example, and we're subject to we've got a lot of Flash in our courses right now too. And who's going to pay for rebuilding all those things that are in Flash right now, which was blood, sweat, and tears to begin with. That's kind of on the development side. We'll go back to that.
Yeah. So I want to, and by the way, I should mention, if you people in the audience have questions, I've got questions prepared, but you can just come on up here and ask them. So we'll just have a whole session where we're grilling them or making comments. I want to come back to this notion of hybrid, because my suspicion is that most people who are using OER are trying to hybridize their classrooms. And I know George has done that, just as Fernando was talking about the hybrid model at Utah, George is nodding. So I want to pass the microphone down to George. And can you tell me, again, let's get specific, in your teaching situation, what does it mean, because I think you consider your situation a hybrid?
Yes.
Okay, so what does that mean for your students, and what do the students do?
First of all, before I answer that question, I should say that, and I noticed some people had expressed some concerns about this online, the idea of sacrificing 2 precious face-to-face hours a week with your students, instead of speaking French with my students for 5 hours a week, why would you give that up and speak with them for 3 hours a week? And I can only speak from my own personal context, in that I teach in a community college, first of all. It's an open admissions institution. I was daydreaming about having an army of graduate students just a minute ago, but I'm back now. And I think my students' needs are perhaps a little bit different. They are not the same kinds of learners that one might find in a four-year institution, whether it be public or private. I have all different age levels, people with children, jobs, other responsibilities, and so giving up that face-to-face time in exchange for something really did come to mind to me. I was weighing what to do with them. So in my case, I've already described what we do in the face-to-face time, that is to say, work through the activities that are in the various chapters of Français Actif, especially the more communicative activities. During the time that they're away from me, it just so happens that I happen to wear another hat at my institution, and that's that I'm the language technology person at my institution. So I'm sitting in the language labs where they have to go and do their 2 hours of time. So they are being not just monitored, and their work is not just being tracked on a computer, but there's some guide that they see for 3 hours a week as their instructor there to help them out as well. So that can't be possible for everybody, of course. When they come to the language labs, and during those 2 hours, they have to be in a physical computer lab on campus. Our institution spent a lot of money on some physical language labs and paid some guy to work in that language lab and bought a lot of really nice software, and not everyone was using it. So it's my job as the language technology cheerleader to use that language technology. And so what they're doing in the language labs for those 2 hours a week are things like using software. I've picked specific exercises that go with the grammar, the vocabulary, the culture of the given chapters that we're working our way through in Tell Me More, for example. Or if it's a grammar point, I use another piece of software called French Grammar Tutor. And I work a lot on pronunciation with them, or open-ended speaking. So if there's an open-ended speaking topic, a list of conversation questions, a reading passage, some cultural note in the margin of the book, I'll have them record that and send it to me. So they're working on compositions as well. So they're using writing aids that are only accessible in the language labs. Like we have this thing called System D that lets them
Can I
use
bring up a
references.
point by follow up what you're saying? This comes from Amanda DeLola, who could join us here in person, but is here online. And Amanda is a graduate student here at UT, and she is a user of Français Interactif, and she writes in that it's changed my use of OER. I changed kind of my conception of what the teacher is. It's more of a tour guide. And as you're talking about the changing role of teachers, you have a double role. You're a teacher, but you're also the director of this Language Technology Center. So I was just thinking about Amanda's comment of tour guide. Tell me more, all these technologies that you were running through this list, when you're teaching in the classroom, that's one part of your job. But then when you're in a hybrid course, when you say, oh yeah, go and do all that other stuff, what do you do? Are you teaching then?
No, I'm not one-to-one teaching them. If they have a question, they know where my office is. It's in the lab. They'll come and find me and ask me a question.
Well, I guess going back to her metaphor of the tour guide, you can't just expect them to get the stuff to do online. Do they not need some help to find things?
Every once in a while they do. They have an orientation at the beginning of the semester. When I take them first and guide them through the specific tasks that they have to do sometimes. And I give very explicit instructions as well.
Okay.
With lots of screenshots and arrows and smiley faces.
Okay, so we're still talking about hybrid. Would you consider, Amy, your course hybrid?
I think that the term hybrid is, at least to my mind, changing. Because what exactly makes the course hybrid? That part of it is taking place, the learning is taking place outside of class. I mean, does that make it hybrid, or is it that we're using technology to facilitate language learning? Does that make it hybrid? I mean, I think most, even commercial products, have an online workbook component. And if the students are doing online workbook, I don't know if that's true for K-12 materials, but at least for higher ed materials, that's the case. So what exactly is hybrid? I mean, we have the contact time in class, so there's not less contact time. But I would think on some level, yes. And then if you start thinking about hybrid in terms of what it means with the actual materials that you're using to teach the course, that concept of remixing materials online, and sort of the new hybridity that some scholars are discussing. So I think that hybrid, that all of this has almost become taken for granted, that you're going to have some technology in your teaching. And so maybe it's a continuum now of, how much takes place in class and out of class. I think that what can take place out of class should, things that don't involve other human beings necessarily, can take place out of class, and that's appropriate. And
yeah, I guess a new term that seems to be coming in is flipping.
Right.
So it's not just the notion of hybrid, because you're right, everybody's mixing these things online and offline, but it's what you used to do now has migrated someplace else. So you're flipping things around somehow.
That's right. So it's more engaged problem-solving time, or in the case of foreign language, it's interaction time, and then other components of learning take place outside of class.
Okay. So, yeah, same question, Fernando. The specifics of then the Utah program, what do they do? What do your students do?
Well, ours is a hybrid program, and following up on what Amy just said, not because we are combining face-to-face with online time, but because I think we changed the way we look at the roles of instructor and students. And, in the old model, I think you're probably all familiar with the Atlas complex, and the Atlas as a teacher who's responsible for all the knowledge that is present in the classroom. That was the old model. The new model is we are the architects, right? We are the tour guides. We design the plan, the learning plan for our students. And if you believe that that's the right model, then your presence in the classroom is not always indispensable, right? Your students can get input in the target language from a variety of sources, and technology now allows that. And if you believe in that, then a better use of your time is to give your students opportunities to be exposed to those other sources of knowledge that are available out there. So what we do in our program is we reduce the face-to-face time by half. And when we are not there, when we're not in the face-to-face session or portion of the class, students are doing activities online. And it could be a variety of things, from watching videos to reading authentic text to interacting with other students in the target language. Basically, what they're doing when they're not in the classroom is they're preparing or doing preliminary stuff that will be necessary for them to do the communicative practice that they have to do in the classroom. Mm-hmm. So just to give you an example of how we use the little OERs, if in a first-year classroom they're dealing with food, for example, we have a number of study abroad programs all over the world in Spanish. And in some of those programs, the students who participate in those programs have to maintain a weekly blog, and we give them blog assignments. So every week they have a topic that they have to blog about, right? So one week they have to blog about eating in the country where they're staying. So if they're in the Dominican Republic, they write about eating in the Dominican Republic. What do people eat? How do they eat? If they're in Spain, they do the same thing. So when the students are on campus taking the regular course, one of the things that they have to do during their online time is they have to go online and read those blogs that other peers posted when they were abroad, read them, make comments, come back to class, and be prepared to talk about it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Fernando just mentioned that what his learners are doing outside of class is helping them prepare for what they're going to do during the face-to-face time. And that reminded me of one of the big differences of the way things were before as they are now in my own course. We had to pull the car over a lot during class time and work on the car, open up the hood and work on the car, talk about grammar, etc. And we may not be on the Autobahn all the time now, but we're moving at a nice steady pace all the time, and we don't have to pull the car over now.
In terms of what definitions of hybrid, in other words, to me, hybrid means reduced class time in favor of sort of displaced interaction. The interaction is displaced into an online environment. So, and at the very beginning of our design process, we were talking about one very flawed instructional context and replacing it with one which is a flawed instructional context. But they're about equal. The first one, of course, is the classroom. And the second one is a hybrid instructional delivery. And the classroom, why is it flawed? Because you've got a whole room full of people, and what do they need? They need input, and they need production opportunities, and they mostly don't get them. They get input, okay. Production opportunities, we did some math when we were talking about, well, what do we need to actually replace? About 5 minutes a week of, if you're in a class of 25 students, how much time does each student get to express him or herself in a creative way, other than sort of a drill response or something? Maybe 5 minutes. Yeah, you've got the dominant kids who might get up to 6 or 7 and maybe even 10. Some kids get 1 minute in a week. So what are you actually replacing? Not much. It doesn't work very well. It's what we do. It's what we've done for years, decades. It doesn't work very well. Our students learn slowly. We don't give them enough time. To replace that isn't that hard. So with our online environment, we say, okay, 80 minutes, it's all communicative. 20 minutes individual every week. Well, we've already hit the ball out of the park in terms of the individual students. After that, all the input sources, massive amounts of audio, video, diverse accents, interactive exercises, and so forth. We did a 3-year comparative study when we started down this road, and basically there was no significant difference right across the board, from classroom to the hybrid instruction.
You mean in terms of their proficiency level at the end, their performance?
Exactly. Yeah, and we had external evaluators for the whole thing. In other words, people who are doing speaking samples and writing samples and so forth, as well as the common final exams and so forth. So it was an exhaustively defined evaluative study over 3 years, designed by psychologists. We didn't touch it. So really, it's for me.
I would say as an administrator, I'll play devil's advocate a little bit. But that's, you cut face-to-face time with an instructor in half, and you still have the same performance. That's pretty good.
It's pretty good. However, part of the evaluation.
Because I can hire fewer teachers.
No, you can't. And believe me, because actually, when our first grant funding, when we got it, which was $400,000 from Mellon Foundation, they were, at the time, Mellon was funding stuff throughout higher ed and asking everyone to sign on the dotted line that they were going to save instructor time. Everybody signed except me. I said, it ain't going to happen. It's going to be just as intensive. And we documented that through logs and so forth for students and instructors. Same amount of time on task, whether it's the hybrid design or the in-class. The instructors, yeah, they only have 80 minutes face-to-face. Try meeting, we do half and half, so I've got 10 students, 20 minutes each every week. Well, you're getting close already. Then you have to be available online. If you really only go online once a week or something to correct tests, you're not a hybrid instructor. So in fact, in terms of time commitment by the instructor, it's no less. And if you go over those numbers, you go up into the 30s.
Okay,
let
me hear from Amy and Fernanda, because I don't think they completely agree, or maybe they have a different experience.
No, I just wanted to add that if you're concerned about convincing your administrators that this works, we also did studies looking at levels of proficiency of students who were taking the hybrid courses versus the traditional courses. There's no significant difference. But the only place where we did find the difference was in the level of retention. Students who are in the hybrid courses are much more likely to complete the language sequence than students who are in a traditional course. And that is good news for administrators, because that means that down the line, at the higher levels, you will have more students.
Well, and it's also good news for you, because language learning is longitudinal. It's developmental. It takes a long time. So I guess the assumption that filling around with a methodology is going to have a huge impact after a year, maybe not, probably not. Yeah.
No, I think that Fernanda sort of spoke to my concern, because listening to Chris is, well, then why do it at all? I mean, if there's no significant differences between outcomes, there's no significant difference between instructor time, there's cost involved in development. It's nice that Carnegie gives you $400,000, but not everybody gets that. Why go hybrid? And I think Fernando has sort of answered that. There's retention.
He's got one answer is
retention.
But I would also say that you're still measuring the same thing, so maybe if you had different tests, you might find different. I mean, they're always learning. They may not be learning. It may not show you gains in linguistic proficiency, but I think there are other kinds of gains that might be measurable, right?
As long as those kinds of gains are meaningful to your administrators, if that's what we're talking about, you know, from an administrator perspective. I mean, yeah.
Right. Oh, any questions from the audience? I'm doing all the work here. No one, I'm not getting any help from online. Okay, yes.
I'm not sure if this makes sense, since most of this is open, but I would like to see by the developers of these websites, like kind of show us the highlights and features of each of the websites, especially if they are behind classroom, just to get some ideas of what is being done.
We can talk about that tomorrow, how to integrate that into tomorrow, because we'll be talking about collaborating and sharing and putting on our developer's hat. So I'll give you some time to think about how we could do that, because if they all do a show and tell, we're going to really run over time. But maybe we can give that idea to them and they can show kind of highlights quickly from their websites tomorrow.
Or if you Google me, I can send you my syllabus, course calendar, and examples of materials that I use with the OERs.
Actually, in my courses, there's an open and free version at the Open Learning Initiative, so if you just go there, you can click through French.
Just for the people online, the question was, well, gee, I'd really like to see all these sites and have them show us what they do and how they distribute their time, and so we're going to try to look into that perhaps tomorrow. Any other questions, comments? Rebecca?
I'm hearing a lot of talk about doing this at the college level. Are there anybody doing this at lower levels, like high school level language courses?
That's the question was, well, this is all about higher education. What about K through 12?
I am quite explicit about having created this course for higher ed. However, the French Online course is actually in use fairly extensively, usually doubled, right? So in other words, our French one is used for a year at the high school level, and a subsequent year, our French 2 second semester is used for another year, and sometimes even stretch further than that. It's in use. It was not developed for that market. There's no question. Some of the topics, I'm sure that instructors have to skate around, and we go into personal problems and drug abuse and things like that, which might be a little bit dubious but they are in use at the secondary level. But in terms of people actually doing this kind of development explicitly, OER for K through 12, I don't know about that, but there's other people here who will.
Yeah, let me ask, they're passing that around. I know for like French Interactive, all the developers are at the higher ed level. We talked about in the morning session about big versus little OERs. And the big the institutions like the Carnegie Mellon or University of Texas, of course, have more funds, and they have the pieces here together of content developers and technical experts who can do large-scale projects. So most of the large-scale project courses are affiliated with institutions of universities. But again, to echo what Chris says, when you put it on the web, people find it and they adapt it and use it for their own needs. So the majority of users for French Interactive are not higher ed. They are, number one, they're informal learners. So to make the distinctions that we often make don't even make sense to them. They're outside those boxes. And high school teachers and even middle school teachers are using our materials. So we had in mind college kids, but yeah. But I would say that so there's a lot of development of OERs, but they're going to be smaller, and if they're not tied explicitly to these big institutions. So I saw some hands go up. Yes.
I just weren't if I completely understood Amy's question and your response. Because what I heard was the why you do it was the question, and the response was retention, and maybe we're not measuring the right things. But from an administrator standpoint, I mean, if that's the state of the answer right now, we need to change measurements and other things to really, show that this is valuable. That doesn't leave an administrator in a position to say this is a great thing to invest resources in. Until, it's sort of like in a pilot stage, until you really prove the pilot, that's when I think you see major resources going towards. So help me maybe better.
Yeah, okay, the question from the audience is to clarify then our discussion, previous discussion, Amy raised the issue about retention, or Fernando raised the idea about retention, that it's helping in the retention, but not necessarily in linguistic proficiency. And so what I was saying is, well, okay, so maybe linguistic proficiency is a wash, but there are other areas that they may have improved in. It's just that the problem is actually an artifact of testing. If you use the same test over and over and over again, you don't find out all this other incidental learning that now that may be important or not for the way we, for an administrator. But it's one of the problems I think that actually kind of keeps that, one of the problems that we run into, I would say, in OERs is that people are still trying to put OER in the same kind of box. And so people can do many different things that they have never been able to do before. We're not even sure what it's good for yet. But I have a feeling that if we were to have tests that could actually show better interactional skills, that would probably, not just grammatical skills as they're measured now, that since all of these new social media, all this software is to get people to actually use the language, that we might have tests that are granular enough to show a difference. So that's kind of what I was saying. That I do think it probably has more of an effect than we even know how to show right now. So we keep using the same test, and that gives us the same results. And that's true in education in general, isn't it? I mean, we do that a lot. Jonathan?
Can I respond to that question? Just, in other words, thinking administratively, what's the point of this? Well, when we designed our courses, it was to respond to a specific need in a technical university, people who had labs and so forth, and the 4 to 5 meetings a week, classes that we were doing at our basic levels were impossible for them. They couldn't come on Tuesdays. And the same thing with our architecture students and our art students and so forth. So we really said, okay, we need to organize our instruction differently. Now, of course, we can also, with subsequent advances, for example, ubiquitous Skype and so forth, over the summer, it's the only way we teach basic language anymore. My colleague teaches a dozen students who are scattered around the world and sort of reprograms the contacts as a language assistant, helping with individual sessions and so forth, but they never meet all together anymore. It's all, so that it has other implications, but the primary way is how instruction is organized, rather than you've got to be, in Baker Hall 127 every day at 10 o'clock. The other thing that I wanted to mention, as opposed to George's example, is that our kids at Carnegie Mellon, we are a highly technical university, so they will not accept coming to a lab for anything anymore. If they can't do it in Starbucks, they won't do it. So our courses have no lab connection whatsoever. Everything is exclusively, I guess one would say, in the cloud these days, right?
Jonathan?
I would say, I guess in response to the same question, I think this is a transitional phase, I think, and we're trying to figure out how this is all going to work. So, one, I think we don't know the right questions to ask. Two, we're using old tests to test perhaps what's going to be a new model. But for me, I mean, the big things are going to be training graduate students. So as we make the transition, there is going to be a point where we're in a new model. The paradigm has shifted. We need to train graduate students how to do that. So for us, creating the materials, the backstory, the second channel is training the graduate students, how to create the materials, how to use the technology. Training the undergrads to be technologically literate, because we all don't have students from Carnegie Mellon. And despite the fact that they're all called digital natives, most of them don't know how to do much other than check their cell phone and Facebook. So training graduate students, training undergraduate students, I think perhaps are not linguistic pedagogical goals, but I think they're pedagogical goals nonetheless, which I think are in the interest of the university, short-term and long-term.
So let me try to summarize what Jonathan has raised. Jonathan Perkins has raised, I think, a very important point about the necessity of training the new generation, whether it be graduate students or undergraduates, to use these materials. Because as he says, we may call them digital natives, but sometimes they don't know best how to learn with these materials and for language learning. Did I get that about right?
And graduate students, I mean, the next generation of teachers.
And the next generation of teachers. And somebody raised, I think it was Devin, raised that point. Well, do you know, in our foreign language education program, where OER is not on the radar screen, or at least not yet. But she wants to qualify that. Yes, Devin.
I would actually disagree with that.
Okay.
This summer, I'm actually taking a COERLL course as part of the training to be a graduate assistant instructor. In fact, it's this methods course.
Yes.
On the COERLL site. So what I've heard from my instructor is that they it's been fairly recent that they've implemented this.
Right.
So it's one of those things, like you said, it's the transitional period, and it may become the norm.
Okay, so then a graduate student just spoke up to correct me. She says, well, this is a transitional period, so it's not that we don't get any introduction at all. It's coming. She gave an example of a methods course that she's learning. Parts of it are coming from COERLL, because we do have an online methods course, and part of it's being implemented in her classroom. So, yeah, I guess the basic agreement in the room is that we're in this transitional phase right now. Yeah, I just wanted to mention I went to southbysouthwest.edu last time. So, you know, South by Southwest is this big thing that happens in the spring here. Music and film and interactive, and now we have educators joining the mix. And I went to a panel discussion, much like this, of open education. And it wasn't foreign languages, it was just open education in general. And they were pretty... it was pretty negative. I was surprised because they were saying, you know, we're creating all this stuff and teachers aren't using it. And they're not, we talk about the 4 R's, but nobody's remixing, nobody's anything. And somebody, a teacher educator said, we just need to give up with that generation and focus all of our attention on this new generation of grad students because, number one, they do have better technical skills, and I think we're just wasting our energies. And I thought, wow, okay. Maybe she's right. I don't know. It was a provocative comment. And got a lot of... So then we started talking about how can we retrain teachers for this new world. Rachel.
I'm a new teacher. I just got my certification last year, and I got my certification through an alternative certification program here in Austin. And the technical knowledge I have is things that I've learned along the way, either from being here at UT a few years ago, or that I've learned on my own in my own time. I received almost no training at all in any sort of technology from my educator certification program. And unfortunately, since that's the only certification program I've taken, I don't know how typical that is, but I don't think it's atypical either.
This is really good. Because this is leading up to where we're going. We planned this. This is beautiful. Because we're talking about, this is professional development. And as things become more technical and more stuff moves online, it becomes imperative for teachers to learn how to do this. And we're finding there's the widening gap, actually. A lot of people are excited about this, they just don't know. So I'm right now responding to Rachel, who just spoke up and talked, gave kind of a personal anecdote. A first-year teacher who is just now out in the field, she said she never received any kind of technical training as part of her teacher education certification program. That's correct, yeah. So we have something from our virtual group. Could George talk about the different forms of testing? Maybe panelists could talk about understanding target culture or a better understanding of pragmatics out of language. Okay, that's kind of what I was hinting to, but yeah, you guys go with that. So what different forms of testing are there?
I don't like the word testing. It gives me anxiety. So I like evaluation and assessment a little bit better. So and I have lots of different kinds of those things going on. In my course, for example, there are written exams that students have to complete outside of class. We don't use our talk time for that. There are also compositions that students have to write as well. There are quizzes that they have to turn in. And there are, perhaps most importantly, and weighted most importantly in my grade breakdown, oral interviews that that students have to do.
Maybe in reading between the lines here, let me paraphrase this question. I think what they were trying to get at was, in light of what we were already saying about the way, if we keep testing in the same manner, if we keep testing in terms of the grammatical syllabus, rather than in terms of target culture and pragmatics, then we keep getting the same thing. Can somebody else help me out with that? Do any of you have new forms of testing that are somehow more culturally or pragmatically oriented than, yeah?
Well, just one comment that's related to that is that my students are building a portfolio throughout the semester. So that kind of answers the question a little bit. So they have this checklist, like a little passport that gets pretty much stamped as they go along throughout the semester.
Because we're taking a different approach to foreign language instruction in general, that is elevating the goal of intercultural sensitivity and content learning, integrating content and language learning. The assessments necessarily reflect that. So I think our assessments are very different than a typical program. The problem is it's hard to make them understandable extra institutionally. I know that different type of learning is going on in our program right now. I know our students are coming out very differently than our students were coming out even 3 years ago before we did this. But finding a way to make this meaningful, it does not fit within the actual proficiency guidelines. The OPI is not going to show this necessarily. So there has to be some investment in generating new assessments that we can all understand that capture some of these new learning goals, and we have to elevate the new learning goals to deserve that. If we're still stuck in the oral, transactional, self-referential language teaching learning model, there's no impetus for creating those things.
That answers your previous question. That's what I was driving. Thank you very much, Amy. Because I mean, if we have maybe one of the goals for foreign language teaching should be intercultural sensitivity, as you mentioned. How do you test that? Number one, I mean, there are models out there, but they're kind of flaky. And number two, is that what the administration cares about? I mean, they may, I don't know, but if it's only to reproduce students who can conjugate the verbs correctly, if we're still looking at it in terms of accuracy, and that's the only thing that matters,
I think standardization is difficult with this because it is so context specific. But if you'd like to see examples of the assessments that we're doing that are integrating language learning and content learning, I'd be happy to share them, how we're approaching this.
Somebody's asking for examples.
Sure. Okay. So we do use traditional written sit and take an exam, but instead of, let's say, we can just pick a grammar point that is in a lot, let's go preterite and imperfect. I think a lot of languages do that. So instead of writing about their own personal experience, or you're giving them the prompts and they're putting together hybrid sentences, or you have to choose this, or you instead ask them to react to content that is being taught. So you use the preterite to describe what life was like under Franco in Spain, or and so you're actually integrating the two things. We also do a lot of blogs because one of our explicit goals is for the students to be able to demonstrate that they can analyze a social problem from more than one perspective. We're not trying to brainwash them into believing one perspective or another, but just to be able to recognize that more than one perspective exists based on someone's experiences. So we will have them blog about specific, which activity that we did in the last 3 weeks helped you understand a problem from more than one perspective. Please, outline the two perspectives and express your opinion about this or not, and all in the target language, obviously. So making that much more explicit and part of these. I mean, meanwhile, we're looking at the grammar while they're writing these blogs, but making their production meaningful and directed towards the other goals of the course.
Okay, I have a couple of, we're coming up on the time, but I want to ask all the panelists, if they consider themselves open educators, do you use that as do you identify with that, or because some of your materials are maybe on that continuum I kept talking about at the beginning of the morning. You know, are you trying to open up things? Are you trying to open up your courses more? Where are you on the continuum? Where would you place yourself?
I think I'm somewhere in the middle. I'm a little uncomfortable with sharing some of the resources that I've created for my own classes, my exams, for example, only because of previous experience, seeing them being used as study notes in other people's classes, and that makes me uncomfortable. But in most contexts, yes, I guess I am. I think I'm more of a technophile than I am an open educator.
Okay.
And I like to share with my colleagues at my own institution. And what I like most about the open education movement, I guess, is that new doors for collaboration have been opened up. For example, between myself and you guys here at COERLL, I never would have had that connection otherwise. So, yes, in the middle.
Yeah, and it goes both ways because George has taught us a lot about our materials, right? So we give them to somebody like George who runs with it. So, Amy.
I do. I consider myself an open educator, and I think what I'm creating is the issue of what we're remixing is still on the table, but anything that we create, we share openly, tests, anything. So yes, I would say yes. I don't know if Carl agrees because of where we are on the continuum, but I think that it's because of an OER and we're promoting dissemination of knowledge in an open way.
Yeah. No, this isn't about whether this is how you would use the term you see
I'm
yourself.
hypersensitive because I don't know. I want to be able to say remix, do whatever you want with our materials, but it's not out of a question of being possessive in any way. It's a question of respecting the materials themselves, which I did not author all by myself. So that's a whole other issue.
That is another issue. We'll get into the problem. Collaboration sounds great, but it's not always easy. There are lots of issues there. How do we collaborate with our colleagues? You know, I've been listening to discussions about, okay, I've got the vision, but I want to spread it to my colleagues. It's not quite working. Or the administration. Okay? Fernando.
I'm hybrid.
Okay.
In practice, I'm hybrid. Philosophically, I'm all for it. I think this is where we're going. There's no going back. Education is moving towards more and more openness. There are still obstacles, and that's part of the reason why I'm still hybrid. But I think with time, this is where we're going. There's no doubt about it.
Yeah, I think the key word is philosophy. It is a philosophy. Yeah.
I'm certainly hybrid as well. I mean, to a certain extent, I was dragged kicking and screaming into this by the Open Learning Initiative, you know, where part of the condition of funding for that project was you must have an open and free version. And of course, our courses are offered in 2 versions, and one of them which is completely open and free, and which thousands and thousands and thousands of independent learners use every year.
Free meaning it doesn't cost anything.
Costs nothing, right?
Yeah.
Exactly. And then there's a version which has a modest enrollment fee per student and gets you instructor tools and grade books and all that kind of stuff, tracking tools, which is available to instructors basically. So the fact is, when we created the course, I quite explicitly put things in throughout the course. If you are studying on your own, by now you should have a local person in the community who speaks French, who you're able to sit with and practice every once in a while. And you should have at least 2 co-learners, otherwise you will not be able to learn French. In other words, going through this course will not teach you French. You must interact with real people and must find ways to interact with French-speaking cultures. So those are kind of seeded throughout the course to help people who are not in an enrolled institutional environment but are using the course individually. So I guess I'm sort of against my better judgment. And I keep talking about being a songwriter too, and the whole issue of intellectual property to me is a big thing. And songwriters, those of you who are in anywhere in touch with the music business is in free fall because of the disappearance of practical copyright. Now, what happens in the education business remains to be seen, but it's not clear to me that it's in the interest of institutions to support. In other words, it looks to me like the Harvard-MIT model is basically doing a Google, which is you give a bunch of stuff away free so you can sell the things that matter at the same price. You're not giving away course credit. You're basically increasing the prestige of the institution, which frankly doesn't need much increasing in their cases, right? But making it difficult for other institutions to compete. They're saying, well, okay, we've got to give things away for free. Well, we can't afford to give things for free. It's a real quandary. It's not a simple issue for me. So I'm kind of, I want to see people who can't afford it learn. On the other hand, I also am aware that I'm a reasonably well-paid professional who likes his job, and I'm in a position of privilege, which is somewhat threatened by free stuff. Anyway.
Good. That was a moment of honesty. That was good. Any last questions from the audience or from our virtual guests? Yes.
It's not a question, but it's something to keep in mind. You know, some of us, when we went to college, we were with a typewriter, and a lot of times when people go through this is how you do it. It's not a step-by-step process. You get a 15-minute instruction on something, a new program that they're implementing at school or wherever it is, and they go, it's real easy, just go here and follow directions. But it's not always that easy. So some of us, I need more step-by-step than somebody saying, these are the directions you need to do and don't leave the step out.
Oh, I hope you're coming tomorrow.
I am, but
okay.
What I'm saying is that that's like, you got your undergrad degree and you learned theory at UT and then you didn't learn anything else. I've never learned any of it, except for, doing it on my own. And that's
So again, there's a discussion in the room about how some of the teachers started in the era of the typewriter. And while they are full of goodwill and interest, they want to join the open education movement. It really comes back to skills and competencies, and there's a big gap. So how do people who are interested in joining this movement join the movement? I'll kind of put it like that. Okay, well that's a nice segue to where we're going tomorrow. And so we've been talking at a fairly general level today. Tomorrow we're going to I'm going to ask the developers, okay, how do we develop OERs for people like you? And also the idea is, how do we, I think, centrally create communities? Because you need to talk to other people. Teachers are always talking to each other, and that's where the dissemination of information happens. They need to show this cool thing that they just learned about. So we really need to grow these communities, whether they're in our schools or at these things that we call school districts. I mean, what level do we need this community of practice? Just to kind of give away a little bit of what we're going to talk about, this also has to have a reward system, because all of this free stuff is great, and people giving up their time is great. The teachers don't. You're here, but a lot of teachers don't want to join unless they're really going to get something out of it. So of course we're going to get credits. Those of you who are here in Texas, the TEA will award you CPEs, these continuing education credits, but there's also something new in the mix, and that's called badges. So badges is something that we will want to talk about and unveil our program to professionalize teachers to become open educators. That's where we're going with this. So we're going to show you tomorrow a series of badges. Badges sounds like Girl Scout, Boy Scout, those things on the sash. But they're really growing because particularly in fields such that are native to the internet, fields like computers, computer design. If you're a computer designer, things are moving very, very quickly. And if you get a degree from a university, your employer wants to know, okay, great, you got a degree, but what can you do? What can you do? So imagine you are a teacher. Rachel just said she is just, she's new to the market. What if she went to her principal and said, great, so you're certified. What can you do? Huh? Well, I can teach. Okay, but what can you do as a teacher? What kinds of things can you... And you say you're a language teacher, so what level of your skill, what level do you speak? I mean, this is a new world, and we want to be able to show our competency levels, including our competency in this thing that we're now calling open education. So, and a lot of this has to do with technical skills. How can I get these technical skills, and how can I show them? And that's where badges comes into the mix. Okay, so I hope that's an enticement for you guys to come back tomorrow, because it's going to get real concrete.